Number 15. Tylenol murders. Just like countless other victims in the summer of 1982, Linda Morgan entered a local grocery store seeking a simple household remedy for a bodily ache, a bottle of Tylenol. Unbeknownst to her, that everyday purchase would bring her a hair's breadth from tragedy. The 35-year-old mother returned home, looking forward to relief. But as she twisted the cap and peered inside, she felt something was off. Call it intuition, call it what you will, but she instinctively made a decision that would save her life. Instead of the Tylenol, she opted for aspirin, discarding the newly opened bottle. It would be days later that she'd fully comprehend the significance of her gut instinct. Soon after, news broke of a string of deaths in the Chicago area. 7 people had fallen victim to an invisible killer taken by millions a day. Tylenol capsules, laced with cyanide. The series of deaths had turned a trusted household name into a death pill. In the weeks that followed, the headlines were dominated by fear and disbelief. How could something so ordinary become so deadly? The city was thrown into chaos. Linda, however, remained blissfully unaware of how narrowly she had escaped the body count. It wasn't until weeks later, when a CBS 2 reporter knocked on their door, that the Morgans began to understand just how close they had come. Linda could have been the 8th victim. For years, the case remained unsolved. The Tylenol murders, as they came to be known. 40 years passed, and the world had changed. The murders altered the way medication was packaged, and tamper-evident, hard-to-remove seals are now ubiquitous. But questions remain. What was the killer's motive? How have they managed to evade justice for so long? And most pressing of all, who are they? In 2020, the Arlington Heights Police Department revived the investigation. With the advancement of DNA technology, there was a renewed effort to unearth long-buried clues. Laura Morgan, Linda's daughter, now found herself pulled back into the mystery that had nearly claimed her mother's life. She provided her DNA, along with one of her late father's old smoking pipes, hoping to eliminate their family from the investigation. She hoped that with new technology, there might finally be some closure for those who had suffered so much. Although no one has ever been charged or convicted in connection with the poisonings, James William Lewis, a resident of New York City, was found guilty of extortion in the case. He had sent a message to Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, claiming responsibility for the deaths and demanding $1 million to cease the attacks. But he passed away from a pulmonary embolism in 2023 at the age of 76, perhaps taking the whole truth with him. Number 14. Identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, the Bitcoin creator. Launched in January of 2009, Bitcoin shook the foundations of finance. For years, the digital currency's creator remained something of an urban legend. Smoke and mirrors. With the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, the tech world wondered, did this individual even exist? That is, until 2016, when a man named Craig Wright stepped forward and attempted to lay claim to the pseudonym. Wright's claim was bold, but he presented his proof. The demonstration to verify his identity fell flat, leaving more questions than answers. Despite skepticism, Wright marched on. Backed by former gambling billionaire Calvin Ayre, he launched a relentless legal campaign. Anyone who dared to challenge his claim, developers, podcasters, even anonymous voices on social media, found themselves in Wright's crosshairs. The lawsuits piled up, but Wright seemed undeterred in his quest to be legally recognized as the architect behind Bitcoin. But as undeterred as he was, cracks began to appear. A leak in 2022 hinted at a rift between Wright and his benefactor Ayre. Their alliance seemed to be weakening under the strain of constant legal battles and mounting public doubt. The very foundation of Wright's claim seemed like it was turning out to be nothing but a facade. While his legal battles raged, Wright poured his energy into Bitcoin SV, Satoshi's vision, a fork of Bitcoin born from the 2017 block size war. This schism in the Bitcoin community had divided those who saw Bitcoin as digital gold from those who envisioned it as a payment system to rival Visa. Wright positioned Bitcoin SV as the true continuation of Nakamoto's vision, but his claims were met with as much skepticism as his assertion of being Satoshi. The tension reached a new peak in 2021 when a coalition that included some of the biggest names in tech, known as the Crypto Open Patent Alliance, COPA, filed a lawsuit against Wright in the UK. The goal? To have the court officially declare that Wright did not own the Bitcoin white paper, which outlined Bitcoin's creation. As the trial date loomed in February 2024, the stakes couldn't be higher. The legal showdown was poised to last a month, with COPA seeking a negative declaration that would put an end to Wright's threats against developers and his ongoing claims. And then, Wright dropped the He offered to settle the case just weeks before the trial was set to begin. COPA, however, rejected the offer, hard passing on the settlement, which they saw as a ploy allowing Wright to continue his legal attacks unchecked. The trial promised to be explosive. COPA alleged that many of the documents Wright had presented as evidence were outright forgeries. Wright, however, remained defiant. In an interview with Forbes, he claimed his legal strategy hinged on the Bitcoin codebase's movement to GitHub in an attempt to circumvent his control. To Wright and his supporters, this trial was not just a legal battle, it was a war. As the trial drew nearer, the world watched with bated breath. And in March of 2024, Justice James Mellor of the British High Court made his ruling that Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto. And so, the question remains, who is? Number 13. Identity of Banksy, the anonymous street artist. It was the early 1990s in the lively city of Bristol, England, when a name started to make waves in the underground art world. Banksy. The elusive figure began adorning the city's walls with stenciled designs that were both provocative and mesmerizing. The anonymity of Banksy, coupled with his subversive art, captivated the imagination of critics and the public. The first major splash was a large stencil mural titled The Mild Mild West, completed in 1999. In it, a teddy bear was depicted hurling a Molotov cocktail at a trio of riot police. This bold imagery set the tone for a career defined by biting social commentary and playful rebellion. At the turn of the millennium, Banksy's art began to attract attention far beyond Bristol. His work was everywhere, sprayed on city walls and cleverly hidden in plain sight. And the fact that the artist was anonymous and unidentified fueled fascination. The mid-2000s saw Banksy's fame rise internationally. Exhibitions in cities such as Los Angeles and London sold out. His politically charged satirical works earned million-dollar sums at auctions. Celebrities, including Brad Pitt and Christina Aguilera, became avid collectors. Banksy's 2009 Banksy v. Bristol Museum show drew massive crowds, and his 2015 Dismaland, a dystopian theme park installation, was a masterpiece of dark humor. Despite his rising star, Banksy remained cloaked in mystery. Speculation about his true identity drew some to point fingers at known graffiti artist Robert Del Naya of the band Massive Attack, and others at Robin Gunningham, a public school-educated Brit. Among the most compelling theories is the notion that Banksy might be a collective rather than an individual. This idea has gained traction with the growing complexity and scope of his work, which has spanned continents and styles. Whether true or not, it has kept the public guessing. The intrigue deepened in 2017 when the Mail on Sunday definitively identified Gunningham as Banksy, quoting an interview where Banksy mentioned his name was Robbie. But this revelation was far from conclusive. Gunningham himself remained silent, and the debate continued. Meanwhile, Banksy continued to make fun. His famous 2018 stunt where a girl with balloons self-destructed moments after being sold at Sotheby's for £1 million, was a commentary on the commodification of art. In 2021, he executed a Great British Spraycation, a series of artworks across Suffolk and Norfolk that commented on British life with his characteristic wit. To some, Banksy's mysterious persona has been pivotal in the construction of his brand, but the artist's identity is secondary to the powerful statements made through his work. Whether the identity behind the name will ever be definitively revealed is uncertain. What is clear is that Banksy has crafted a public persona that transcends individual identity, leaving behind a legacy that continues to provoke, entertain, and mystify a global audience. Number 12. Shelly Miscavige disappearance. Michelle Shelly Miscavige stood at the edge of her father's grave in August of 2007. The ceremony was brief, as though hurried. After the final words were spoken, Shelly turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd and vanishing from public view forever. For more than a decade, the world has been left to wonder what became of the woman once known as the First Lady of Scientology. The wife of David Miscavige, the leader of the Church of Scientology, has been absent from public appearances since that fateful day. Her disappearance has become one of the many mysteries within the controversial organization. Born Michelle Diane Barnett on January 18, 1961, Shelly's life was founded in Scientology from an early age. Her parents were devoted followers, and by the time she was 12, Shelly had been placed under the direct care of Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Aboard Hubbard's ship, the Apollo, she worked alongside other young girls in the Commodore's Messengers organization. But despite her upbringing within the church, Shelly never seemed to fit in. She was quiet, reserved, and always in the background. Yet she was fiercely loyal to the organization and its teachings. This loyalty would lead her to David Miscavige, a man as volatile as he was charismatic. They married in 1982, and as David rose to power, Shelly stood by his side, taking on the role of his trusted confidant. For years, Shelly's life revolved around the church. She managed tasks for David, dealt with his outbursts, and was even rumored to have driven the search for a new wife for Scientology's most famous member, Tom Cruise. But behind the scenes, those close to the couple saw a marriage devoid of affection and built on duty rather than love. By 2006, the cracks in the facade grew. Once quiet, Shelly now dared to overstep her bounds. She took it upon herself to reorganize the org board within the Sea Org, a move that would seal her fate. David was enraged by her actions, and Shelly's life as she knew it as the First Lady of Scientology ended. In August 2007, Shelly vanished. Questions swirled, but the church remained silent. Some speculated that Shelly had been sent to one of Scientology's secretive camps, perhaps to the mysterious compound known as Twin Peaks. It was rumored that she was undergoing investigations there, rituals of confession, repentance, and submission to the organization that would leave her isolated and alone. As the years passed, concern for Shelly's well-being grew. In 2013, Leah Remini, a former member of Scientology and now one of its most vocal critics, filed a missing persons report with the Los Angeles Police Department. But the response was as cryptic as the church itself. The LAPD classified the report as unfounded, claiming that Shelly was not missing and that detectives had even met with her in person. Yet no details were provided. No confirmation of where or when this meeting took place was ever released. Despite these assurances, Shelly's vanishing act continues to cast a shadow over the already shadowy organization. Official church spokespeople insist that nothing is amiss, that Shelly is merely living her life away from the public eye, and that her privacy should be respected. But for those who knew her, there is little comfort in such statements. Number 11. Murder of Bugsy Siegel. A night at the Flamingo Hotel on the Las Vegas Strip is a night spent in the brainchild of Bugsy Siegel, but it may also be the key to his own murder mystery. Flashback to June 1947. A heavy silence hung over the Beverly Hills mansion where Benjamin Bugsy Siegel sat alone in the living room, skimming over the Los Angeles Times. Known as the architect of modern Las Vegas, the infamous gangster may or may not have been anticipating violence, a violence that had stalked him throughout his life, a life which he'd built on ruthless ambition, bloodshed, and the pursuit of power. Born in Brooklyn in 1906, Siegel had climbed his way up from the mean streets of New York to the glamorous world of Hollywood. His pet project became the gambling mecca of Las Vegas. Known for his equal measures of charm and brutality, he made a name for himself as one of the founding members of Murder, Inc., the National Crime Syndicate's lethal enforcement arm. He was a man with a volatile reputation who played by his own rules. But his penchant for this disregard resulted in dangerous friends and enemies. By the mid-1940s, Siegel had a vision, transforming the desolate Nevada desert into an oasis of luxurious sin. Thus, Sin City was born. With backing from the mob, he took over the construction of the Flamingo Hotel, a lavish resort that would become the cornerstone of the Las Vegas Strip. Yet what was meant to be his crowning glory soon fell into financial disaster. Costs ballooned to $6 million, and the project's repeated delays angered his criminal associates, who were often short on patience. The once promising venture was starting to look like a monumental failure, and the syndicate was growing fed up. On the night of Siegel's death, he sat reportedly untroubled in the comfort of his girlfriend Virginia Hill's home. A glamorous figure in her own right, Hill had recently left for Paris solo. It would be the last time she saw Siegel alive. As the clock struck 10:45 p.m., Bugsy's evening read was shattered by a series of shots, 9 to be exact. The bullets were fired through the window, 4 striking Siegel, 2 in the head and 2 in the torso. The force was so great that one bullet knocked his right eye from its socket, sending it hurtling across the room. In an instant, the storied life of the notorious mobster was snuffed out. One of Siegel's associates, Alan Smiley, was present. As the shots rang out, he hit the ground, narrowly escaping with his life. A single bullet tore through his jacket, a keepsake of his close shave with death. Siegel's assassination sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. Who could have orchestrated such a bold hit? Many pointed fingers at the syndicate itself, believing that Siegel's mishandling of the Flamingo project had sealed his fate. Meyer Lansky, Siegel's longtime friend and business partner, was a prime suspect. Rumors swirled that Lansky had grown tired of Siegel's reckless behavior, and during a secret meeting in Havana, sanctioned the hit. Others speculated that Virginia Hill had played a role. Her sudden departure to Paris raised suspicions, with some believing she had been warned in advance. Some claimed that Hill's brother had been angered by Siegel's treatment of her and had taken matters into his own hands. Decades later, the mystery of Bugsy Siegel's murder remained unsolved. Then, in 2014, a new theory emerged. Robbie Sedway, the son of mobster Mo Sedway, claimed that his father had been behind the hit. According to Robbie, Siegel had threatened to kill Mo during a heated mob meeting, prompting Mo to act first. With the help of his wife's lover, Matthew Moose Panza, Mo Sedway allegedly arranged for Siegel's execution. Despite this compelling story, no concrete evidence has ever confirmed the identity of Siegel's killer. But the case and every suspect involved leaves us with the question, with friends like these, who needs enemies? Number 10. Michelle Von Emster Case. On April 15, 1994, San Diego's Ocean Beach was the backdrop for a gruesome mystery. The body of 25-year-old Michelle Von Emster was found washed ashore. The condition of her remains was so grisly that it left even the most seasoned investigators disturbed. Her right leg was missing from the thigh down, and her body bore other marks of a end. The coroner's office quickly attributed her death to a shark attack, but doubt grew, and soon that doubt seemed warranted. Michelle von Emster had always been a free spirit. The California native with a love for the ocean was a survivor. She had battled cancer while in college and emerged victorious. Wanting to be closer to the water, she moved to Ocean Beach, a neighborhood that was vibrant but high in crime. Michelle was known by some as a carefree party girl, while others knew her as a health-conscious woman who meditated daily by the sea. She sported a butterfly tattoo, highlighting her free-spirited nature. It would be this very tattoo that would help identify her body. The night prior, Michelle had planned to attend a Pink Floyd concert with her friend and roommate. But their plans took an unexpected turn when they were refused entry at the concert gate, having bought the wrong tickets. They drove back home, disappointed, and Michelle asked to be dropped off near the pier, just blocks from their house. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, two surfers noticed an unusual gathering of seagulls near the cliffs, behaving strangely. This drew the surfers' curiosity. What they found was Michelle's lifeless body floating face down in the surf and marked by severe trauma, her eyes wide open. The coroner described her injuries as consistent with a shark attack, but there was something unsettling about the wounds. They were not the clean bites of a great white shark, but jagged, as though her bones had been twisted and wrenched apart. Ralph Collier, a renowned authority on shark behavior, was among the first to dispute the coroner's conclusion. He noted that the condition of Michelle's femur was inconsistent with a shark attack. The bone had been twisted to a point, not cleanly severed. Additionally, the presence of sand in her lungs and stomach suggested she had been alive when her body was submerged, a detail that made the shark attack theory even more improbable. Theories began to swirl. Some believed Michelle had fallen from the nearby Sunset Cliffs, a tragic accident that explained the broken bones, but not the missing leg. Others believed it was murder, disguised as an accident. Michelle had mentioned to friends that she was being stalked by a mysterious man on a motorcycle. This same man later made suspicious inquiries about her autopsy report. Michelle's ex was a second suspect. They had dated briefly, during which he'd penned a morbid poem about her death. Despite these leads, the case went cold. In 2008, the San Diego Medical Examiner was petitioned to reopen the case, but these efforts were unsuccessful. The coroner acknowledged the oddities, but refused to change the ruling or pursue a homicide investigation. And so the question remains, was Michelle the victim of a tragic accident, a shark's savage bite, or did she meet her end at human hands? Number 9. Broad daylight murder of Ken Rex McElroy. The small town of Skidmore, Missouri, was like most small towns. Life moved slowly, neighbors knew each other by name, and the county fair was the biggest annual draw of the year. But that all changed on a morning in 1981, when Ken Rex McElroy, the town bully, met his end in the middle of the street, in full view of dozens of townspeople. What followed was a strange and somewhat satisfying reckoning. Ken Rex McElroy was no stranger to the people of Skidmore. He was a big guy who had terrorized the town for years with outbursts and a blatant disregard for the law. His laundry list of offenses included destroying property, stealing livestock, harassing women, and threatening anyone who dared to confront him. Despite numerous arrests and charges, McElroy had never faced real consequences for his actions. He evaded justice time and again, thanks in part to a sharp lawyer and his own ruthless cunning. He thrived on intimidation, but as it turns out, Skidmore's patience had long been wearing thin. When McElroy shot an elderly grocer in the neck, it seemed that the town had finally had enough. Because even then, the legal system failed them. McElroy was convicted of second-degree assault, but the sentence was shockingly lenient. He was released on bond, and soon enough, he was back in town continuing his reign of terror, rifle in hand. And as often happens in such unjust cases, the townspeople's fear had turned to fury. They held a meeting with the mayor and the sheriff, desperate to find a way to protect themselves from the man who had held them hostage for so long. When it became crystal clear that the law would not save them, someone took it into their own hands. McElroy sat in his pickup truck with his wife that morning, finishing a beer outside the local bar. That's when the shots rang out. He was struck down by bullets fired from 2 different guns. And then there was silence. When the investigators arrived, though as many as 60 people were there, watching in broad daylight, that silence continued. No one saw the shooter. No one heard the shots, except for McElroy's wife, who named a suspect, but her voice was drowned out by the collective denial of an entire town. The investigation that followed was thorough. Local police, the FBI, and 3 grand juries all probed the case, but not a single person was ever charged. Whether spoken or unspoken, the townspeople had made a pact to protect whoever had pulled the trigger. To them, justice had been served, and there was nothing more to say. Despite this consensus, the town of Skidmore did not rebound after their bully's death. Businesses closed, residents moved away, and the community ultimately shrank. David A. Baird, a young county prosecutor, had been thrust into the center of this silent murder story. Baird pushed hard to bring the case to trial, but the evidence was thin, and no one broke the pact. He would spend nearly 3 decades in office by the case he could never solve. As Baird packed up his office for the last time, he left a note for his successor, a list of unsolved cases in the county. Among them was the killing of Ken Rex McElroy. But the new prosecutor, Robert Rice, had grown up with the story, hearing it from those who had lived it. He knew the case well and accepted that the truth would likely never come to light. The town had served its own vigilante justice, and silence was its verdict. Number 8. Pajama Girl Murder. Australian summer bore down on Howling Road as Tom Griffith led his prize bull down it in the heat. Soon, something caught Griffith's eye. A dark shape, partially hidden beneath a grain sack in the culvert that ran beneath the road. Even stranger, he smelled kerosene. He approached the sack and pulled it back. Beneath it lay the charred remains of a woman in yellow silk pajamas adorned with a Chinese dragon. News of the grisly discovery spread through the town of Albury, New South Wales. The victim was a small woman, estimated to be in her 20s, and her murder and identity became the subject of morbid curiosity and speculation. Who was she? How had she met such? The police were baffled. She became known as the Pajama Girl. As the initial inquiry led nowhere, her body was preserved in formalin and was placed on public display in Sydney, a morbid exhibition that drew crowds but yielded no answers. But years later, 2 names surfaced as possible matches for the unknown woman: Florence Linda Agostini and Anna Philomena Morgan. Both women were missing, in their 20s, and resembled the Pajama Girl. Yet when police compared their records, both women were ruled out. Nearly a decade later, in 1944, the stubborn case took a dramatic turn. Police Commissioner William McKay had his eye on Antonio Tony Agostini, an Italian-Australian man who had come back to Sydney following years in internment camps during the war. McKay had known Agostini before the war, and he noticed a nervous edge to the man's demeanor. He pressed him for answers. Under McKay's scrutiny, Agostini cracked. He confessed to murdering his wife, Florence Linda Agostini, one of the women who had been missing since late August 1934, just days before the Pajama Girl was found. He claimed it was an accident, a misfire during an argument in their Melbourne home. In a panic, he drove her body across state lines to Albury, where he abandoned it in the culvert doused it with gasoline, and set it ablaze. The revelation was a bombshell. At long last, the pajama girl allegedly had a name: Florence Linda Agostini. Tony was arrested for murder, but when the case went to trial, he was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter. He received a 6-year prison sentence, but served just over 3 before being released and deported to Italy. It seemed the case had been solved. The young woman was finally laid to rest. But doubt lingered. Years later, historian Richard Evans would change the official narrative, pointing out obvious inconsistencies in the evidence. The pajama girl's eyes were brown, but Linda's were blue. Their body measurements didn't quite match. She had even been ruled out as a possible ID for the victim earlier in the investigation. Had the police ignored other possible identities in their eagerness to close the case? Evans suggested that the pajama girl wasn't Linda Agostini at all. Perhaps Linda had indeed been killed by her husband, but not in the way the court had accepted. Perhaps her body lay elsewhere, while another woman carried her mysterious identity to her grave. Number 7. Edgar Allan Poe. Thump thump, thump thump. Is that Edgar Allan Poe's heartbeat beneath the floorboards? It seems only right that the master of the macabre should meet his end in mystery. And that's just what happened. On a warm June day in 1849, Poe set out on a journey that would be his last, a speaking tour to raise funds for a new literary magazine he was hoping to publish. His dream would be his undoing. Poe was no stranger to taking risks. His life was a series of ambitious ventures, oscillating between success and despair. But this one was different. On his journey from Richmond, Virginia to New York, his fate was calling, and this dark fate would rival any tale he'd ever penned. September 27th arrived, and with it, the first signs of trouble. Poe was supposed to board a ferry to Baltimore before continuing to New York, but he made an unexpected detour. The night before his departure, he was feverish, so he visited a doctor in Richmond. What happened next is lost to time. Poe did board the ferry and reached Baltimore the next day, but instead of continuing north, he vanished. Days passed without a trace of the famed author. Then, on October 3rd, he resurfaced in a seedy Baltimore tavern. But this was not the Poe that his friends and readers knew. He was nearly unresponsive, his sharp mind incoherent. Those who found him assumed he was drunk. This would not be unlike him, as he was a known binge drinker and likely an alcoholic. A note was sent to a local doctor, and Poe was soon rushed to a hospital. But even in his dire state, many noticed something odd: his clothes. Gone was his familiar black wool suit, replaced by an ill-fitting outfit that looked as though it belonged to someone else, a cheap straw hat perched atop his head. In the hospital, Poe's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his speech jumbled nonsense. He seemed delirious. On October 7th, death reclaimed Edgar Allan Poe, and the media grabbed hold of the mystery. The local newspaper reported the cause as congestion of the brain, a vague, unsatisfying explanation that led to speculation. Theories about Poe's death abounded. The most prominent was that he had succumbed to complications from alcoholism. Having seen Poe in the tavern, Dr. J.E. Snodgrass was convinced that the author had been drinking heavily, leading to the tremors and delirium that often accompany alcohol withdrawal for severe alcoholics. Some accounts supported this theory, suggesting that Poe had fallen in with old acquaintances in Baltimore, resulting in a final, fatal bender. But this narrative had its inconsistencies. Poe had recently joined a temperance society, vowing to abstain from alcohol, and the attendant in Poe's final hours, Dr. John Moran, insisted that the author hadn't been drinking in the days leading up to his death. The fact that Poe seemed to rally slightly before his sudden decline also didn't fit the profile of alcohol withdrawal. As time passed, other theories emerged. Could Poe have succumbed to a disease? Diabetes, heart disease, epilepsy, and tuberculosis were all proposed as possible culprits. One particularly intriguing possibility was rabies. A doctor from the University of Maryland noted that Poe's erratic symptoms and reported fear of water, a classic sign of rabies, which preceded his death, aligned with the disease's progression. But there was another, darker possibility, that Poe had been a victim of foul play. The tavern where he was found was being used as a polling place, and some speculated that he had been caught up in a cooping scheme, a brutal form of electoral fraud, where unwilling victims were forced to vote multiple times for a particular candidate. This might explain his strange garb. Beaten, drugged, and disguised, Poe could have been one such victim. Yet, despite the many theories, no definitive answers have been found. The fragments that remain of Poe's final days offer only scraps of evidence that, like his most chilling stories, refuse to come together. Having explored the darkest corners of the human psyche, the famous author has somehow become trapped within it. And for those who adore Edgar Allan Poe, this lingering uncertainty is perhaps the most fitting tribute to his life's work. Number 6. Murder of Marie Roget. On a July evening in 1841, the busy streets of New York City were abuzz with gossip about the disappearance of Mary Rogers, a beautiful young woman known to many as the Cigar Girl for her work at a popular tobacco shop. Her charm and beauty had earned her many admirers, but on that fateful day, that all went up in smoke when Mary's lifeless body was discovered floating in the Hudson River. Everyone asked, who could have killed Mary Rogers, and why? One of the era's most famous writers, and an entry on this list, asked the same. Edgar Allan Poe was captivated by the case. He saw in Mary's death an opportunity to weave a narrative that would both entertain and perplex his readers. In his story, The Mystery of Marie Roget, Poe transformed Mary into Marie, and New York City into the shadowy streets of Paris. Over 3 installments, Poe's detective, Chevalier C. Dupin, dissected the mystery bit by bit, finally arriving at his prime suspect, a naval officer who had once tried to elope with Marie, and who, upon being rejected again, killed her in a fit of rage. As Poe's tale gripped the public's imagination, a real-world twist emerged. A deathbed confession hinted at the involvement of an abortion gone wrong, a scandalous revelation that threw Poe's carefully crafted story for a loop. But ever the master of suspense, Poe adapted his final installment with hints suggesting that a botched abortion may have indeed been the cause of Marie's death, thus aligning his fiction more closely with the disturbing facts. Despite Poe's efforts, the mystery of Mary Rogers' death remained unsolved, although over the years, others came out with their own theories. In 1904, writer Will M. Clemens boldly claimed that Mary and a man had been robbed and murdered inside a notorious tavern owned by a man named Loss. Clemens even speculated that a male body, pulled from the East River shortly after Mary's death, was connected to the case, though few took his theory seriously. Several decades later, Samuel Worthen proposed a different scenario. He believed that Mary's former employer had secretly paid for an abortion at Loss's tavern. According to Worthen, Mary died during the procedure, and the panicked abortionist dumped her body into the Hudson River, hoping to cover up the crime. But it was Raymond Paul, a writer in the early 1970s, who presented perhaps the most chilling theory. Paul proposed that Mary's fiancé, Daniel Payne, was the true culprit. According to Paul, Mary did undergo an abortion at Loss's tavern, but she survived and stayed there to recover. When Payne met her days later, she broke off their engagement, leading Payne to strangle her in a jealous rage and dump her body into the river. Paul's theory hinged on the coroner's report that Mary's body was in a state of rigor mortis when found, suggesting she had been killed not on the day she disappeared, but later, at a time when Payne, who himself committed some months after Mary's death, had no alibi. To this day, the murder of Mary Rogers remains one of New York City's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Whether the victim of a lover's wrath or a tragic accident, the beautiful cigar girl's story endures, immortalized by Edgar Allan Poe. Number 5. Kaspar Hauser. In the late spring of 1828, the streets of what is now Nuremberg, Germany, were stirred by the appearance of a disheveled teenager. A boy of some 16 years was discovered aimlessly wandering a public square. His clothes were tattered, his face confused. In his hands, he clutched an envelope containing 2 letters, one written by an anonymous laborer, the other by a distressed mother. The first letter was addressed to the captain of a local cavalry regiment, pleading for him to take the boy into his care. It allegedly came from a poor laborer who had found and cared for the boy, but could no longer provide for him. The second letter, dated 1812 and unsigned, claimed to be from the boy's mother. She explained that the boy's father had died and that she could no longer care for him, suggesting that he be sent to join the military. The boy introduced himself as Kaspar Hauser. He knew only his name, could not remember his past, and could barely read or write. His strange behavior included an aversion to foods like meat and vegetables. He preferred only bread and water. Absent of manners, he seemed unfamiliar with the basic conventions of civilized society. Despite his oddities, Kaspar's story quickly captivated the public. Within weeks, he had learned to read and write, and soon his life became the subject of universal fascination. He published an autobiography the following year in which he described a harrowing existence in a confined straw-filled cell where he had been fed by unseen figures. Kaspar Hauser became a media sensation. Books, articles, and even plays explored his story, and the public was captivated. However, fame is often accompanied by misfortune. There were multiple attempts on his life, the most serious occurring in December 1833, when he was fatally stabbed. Theories about Hauser's origins and identity were wild and sensational. Some suggested that he was an epileptic, and his delusions were a result of his medical condition. Others proposed that he was a victim of severe neglect and abuse, perhaps driven mad by these experiences. A particularly popular, though widely discredited theory was that Hauser was the rightful heir to a royal throne, hidden away to prevent him from claiming his birthright, a la the Man in the Iron Mask. Kaspar Hauser's mysterious, and some say deceptive accounts of his life continue to intrigue scholars. Whether a con artist or a victim of a mental illness, nearly 2 centuries on, his true identity and motives are still subjects of debate. Number 4. Bible John. The pulse of Glasgow, Scotland's Barrowland Ballroom pumped across 3 separate nights as 3 women danced, unaware that their paths would soon become one. Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puttock had each sought an evening's escape. But as they left the nightclub into the dark, they unknowingly walked toward their deaths. Patricia Docker, a 25-year-old mother, had served in the Royal Air Force. She married an RAF serviceman, Alexander Docker, a love that began strong but had started to erode. After separating from him, Patricia returned to Glasgow with her son and began work as a nurse. One night, she left her son with her mother in order to visit the Barrowland Ballroom. She wore a mustard-colored dress and a duffel coat with a fur collar. The next morning, her body was found discarded in a quiet alley, her clothes stripped from her, and her life taken. Rather than focusing on the loss of the life of a young mother, the police condemned her character in their reports, describing her as a woman who enjoyed male company. Patricia was not the first, nor would she be the last. Jemima MacDonald, a 31-year-old mother of 3, lived for the weekends. On the night she was killed, she wore a frilly blouse and a pinafore dress. Just like Patricia, her body was discovered the next day. Her sister found her lying dead in a derelict building near her home. Also like Patricia, the police reports focused on Jemima's social habits, as if her fondness for dancing somehow justified her murder. Sometime later, 29-year-old Helen Puttock visited Barrowland with her sister Jean. Helen wore a black dress with gold buttons and an ocelot print coat. They danced and laughed, unaware that a predator lurked among them. Helen left the ballroom with a man who called himself John. He quoted Bible verses as they rode together in a taxi. Hours later, her body was discovered, cruelly discarded in a backyard just 8 doors down from her mother's flat. The police investigation became one of the largest in Scottish history, with over 5,000 people interviewed. The press dubbed the suspect Bible John, a name born from Jean's recollection of the man's scripture-filled rhetoric. But as the investigation wore on, the focus shifted from the police and the media's victim shaming to the actual killer who had eluded capture. A killer who was never found. Decades passed, and the story of Bible John became legend, the women reduced to mere footnotes in his story. But their stories have been revived through their families, who have shone a light on their lives in an attempt to reclaim their identities. Number 3. Bogle Chandler deaths. On New Year's morning in 1963, the banks of the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia, became the setting for one of the most perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. Dr. Gilbert Bogle, a respected physicist, and Margaret Chandler, a housewife with a turbulent personal life, were found dead in the early hours of January 1st. Their mysterious deaths captivated public and media attention for decades. Gilbert Bogle was a man of intellect and respect, known for his brilliant work and esteemed Rhodes Scholarship. Married with children, he was seen as a paragon of academic success and respectability. Margaret Chandler, on the other hand, was the wife of Geoffrey Chandler, a colleague of Bogle's. Though married and a mother of 2, she was rumored to be disillusioned with her domestic life and the numerous affairs of her husband. It was said that Geoffrey had given her tacit approval to engage in an affair of her own. The night before their deaths, both Bogle and Chandler had attended a New Year's Eve party in Chatswood. The evening was uneventful until Geoffrey excused himself to go buy cigarettes around 11:30 p.m. His true destination was another New Year's party where he met his mistress. Returning to the first party at 2:30 a.m., Chandler chose to leave as Margaret agreed that Bogle would drive her home. They left the party at around 4 a.m. The next morning, their bodies were discovered by 2 teenagers searching for golf balls. Bogle was found near Fuller's Bridge, face down in the river, with his clothing in disarray. Margaret Chandler's body was found a short ways away, covered in broken beer boxes. Both were in a state of undress, and the scene suggested a struggle. The police were confronted with a confusing crime scene and a lack of clear evidence. Vomit and excrement near the bodies indicated that both had died in distress. Despite this, forensic examinations initially failed to uncover any trace of poison. The media frenzy that followed was fueled by theories ranging from extramarital affairs to secret Cold War research, yet no concrete answers emerged. An inquest in May 1963 concluded that both victims had succumbed to acute circulatory failure, but the specific cause remained unknown. The investigation suggested that the bodies had been covered not by a murderer, but by a compassionate third party who discovered them. The main suspects included a voyeur who had called the police twice, and a greyhound trainer who claimed he had discovered the bodies but later retracted his statement. Over the decades, various poisoning theories were explored. Speculations ranged from cone shell venom to funnel web spider bites, and even LSD. However, tests have ruled out LSD and other poisons, leaving the case open and unresolved. A breakthrough came in 2006 when filmmaker Peter Butt's documentary, Who Killed Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler, proposed its own hypothesis: hydrogen sulfide gas poisoning. The film revealed that a local resident had found Chandler's handbag several kilometers away, near a property associated with a greyhound trainer. Additionally, historical records showed that the Lane Cove River had long been plagued by hydrogen sulfide emissions caused by industrial pollution. High levels of hydrogen sulfide had been detected in the river, particularly around the area where the bodies were found. According to Butt's theory, an eruption of hydrogen sulfide gas from the riverbed could have created a deadly concentration in the grove. Heavier than air, this gas would settle in depressions and could reach fatal levels without visible warning. Exposure to these noxious fumes could cause disorientation and asphyxiation. The purple discoloration observed in Bogle and Chandler's blood is a rare sign of hydrogen sulfide poisoning and further supports this theory. While the case remains officially unsolved, Butt's documentary and subsequent research have painted a compelling picture of a tragic accident rather than a nefarious crime. Number 2. The Princes in the Tower. In the corridors of the Tower of London, 2 young princes were awaiting their fate. 12-year-old Edward V and 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, had been placed under the custody of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, in the spring of 1483. The sons of the late King Edward IV and Queen Elizabeth Woodville had been expected to ascend to the throne. Instead, their destinies were ill-fated. On April 9, 1483, news of King Edward IV's unexpected death from a sudden illness rippled through England. Gloucester quickly traveled to York Minster, where he publicly pledged his loyalty to his young nephew, the new king, Edward V. The Loyalists believed Gloucester was to be the Lord Protector for the young king. However, the political tides shifted when Gloucester, now Richard III, took the throne for himself. Edward's supporters were arrested and sent to Pontefract Castle. There, they were executed on June 25, 1483. The boy's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, fled to Westminster Abbey with her remaining children, seeking sanctuary from the chaos that ensued. Richard III's path to the throne was solidified when Parliament declared Edward IV's marriage invalid, thus illegitimating his children. The young princes were now prisoners of their uncle, housed in the Tower of London. On June 22nd, a sermon at St. Paul's Cross proclaimed Gloucester as the rightful heir, further sealing the fate of the princes. Richard III was crowned on July 6, 1483, but the boy's ongoing presence in the tower became increasingly uncertain. By the summer of 1483, the princes were seen less and less frequently. Reports suggest that the princes were seen playing in the tower's grounds shortly after Richard joined them, but by late summer, they had vanished from view. Attempts to rescue the princes failed. Speculation about their fate grew. Rumors of murder spread beyond England's shores. French and German sources hinted at the grim possibility that Richard had killed the princes before seizing the throne. Yet apart from these accounts and Italian visitor Mancini's writings discovered in 1934, no direct evidence confirming their deaths was found, although many historians believe that Richard III was the commander of their deaths. In 1674, workmen excavating beneath a staircase in the Tower of London unearthed a wooden box containing 2 small skeletons. The bones were quickly believed to be those of the princes and were buried in Westminster Abbey by King Charles II. Despite this, the identity of the remains has never been conclusively proven. As historians and scholars continue to unlock their tragic tale, the final moments of Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, remain under lock and key at the Tower of London. Number 1. Murder of Takabuti. Takabuti, a high-status woman from ancient Thebes, is 2,600 years dead, and yet her death remains a murder mystery in modern times. Takabuti's story began over 2 millennia ago in Thebes, now Luxor, Egypt. She was an elite woman of significant social standing during the 25th dynasty. Yet her story took an unexpected turn in the early 19th century, when, in 1834, a wealthy Irishman acquired her mummy, and a year later, Takabuti became the first known Egyptian mummy to land on the Emerald Isle. Upon arriving in Belfast, an Egyptologist deciphered the hieroglyphics on Takabuti's sarcophagus. He discovered that Takabuti was in her 20s, married, and held the position of mistress in a grand household. It was also learned that her father was a priest dedicated to Amun, the sun god. Despite her elevated social status, the true cause of her death at such a young age remained a mystery, until recent advancements in forensic science provided a revelation. For nearly 2 centuries, Takabuti's remains were subject to numerous studies and analyses. X-rays, CT scans, and radiocarbon dating had uncovered some details, namely that she lived around 660 BC. But it wasn't until the latest round of tests that an unsettling truth was unveiled. Dr. Robert Loynes, a retired orthopedic surgeon and honorary lecturer at the University of Manchester, and his team were preparing Takabuti's mummy for further study. The latest CT scans provided a detailed view of her internal structures, including her heart, a visual which had been absent in earlier examinations. This intact heart was particularly significant, as ancient Egyptians believed it was crucial for the afterlife, where it was weighed against a feather to determine the soul's worth. However, the heart was not the only discovery. The scans revealed clues as to the cause of Takabuti's demise. Her body bore clear evidence of a end, wounds on her upper back, near the left shoulder, suggesting a fatal knife attack. This new evidence contradicted the previous assumption of a natural death. Further analysis uncovered additional peculiarities. Takabuti had an extra tooth and an extra vertebra, rare conditions that had gone unnoticed until now. And a DNA analysis provided a further twist. Takabuti's genetic profile showed closer ties to Europeans than to modern Egyptians, hinting at a complex ancestry. The discovery of Takabuti's European genetic links provides a deeper understanding of Egypt's historical narrative, especially during a period of transition. The research team is compiling their findings into a comprehensive book. Takabuti's mummy remains on display in the Ancient Egypt Gallery at the Ulster Museum. In a case that has spanned millennia, the truth about Takabuti's death has finally been uncovered. But questions remain. Why was she killed? And by whom? We may never know.